This is Parenting Porcupines, episode 8. Tonight, it's just Jessica and Casey, and we've renamed ourselves Your Mom and Someone's Mom because we're, of course, standing in for Melissa and Alex, who aren't here tonight. Our episode tonight is on cancel culture, and this is everywhere, Jessica. Right now, like, there's not a radio show or podcast that has not taken on the concept of cancel culture, and I think part of it is fueled by the election and everybody wanting to put themselves into camps, but I think part of it is fueled by social media. And there's a real sense of self-righteousness that's ruling places like Twitter and Facebook and Instagram right now. And so we're going to talk tonight about cancel culture and how you explain to your kid things like free association, right? And how do you talk to your kids about holding people responsible for their beliefs and also accepting their beliefs as possibly different from your own. So I'm Casey. I'm in Columbia. My daughter is 12. We homeschool at Porcupine Prep here in town. She's a 7th grader. And Jessica, introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and tell us a little bit about your kids. And then let's lead right into this cancel culture topic.
I am Jessica, and I'm located in the upstate of South Carolina. I have 2 sons. One is about to be 12. He just started 6th grade, and the other one is starting 3rd grade. He's 8. Yeah, fun stuff. We're in a hybrid mode right now. They're going 1 day a week, and the other 4 days are e-learning, which is a lot of fun.
So are your boys aware of this concept of cancel culture? I mean, when we think about it in like the capital C cancel culture, is this a phrase that's popping up in your house or something they're aware of?
I don't know that we've actually addressed it as cancel culture specifically, but yes, it is something that they're aware of. More particularly Jackson. Caldwell's a little bit more oblivious to things sometimes. He's not quite at that point where he's picking up on a lot of those types of social things. Right now, his big thing is racism. Caldwell's big thing is racism. We talk a lot about that because he doesn't understand it. But with the cancel culture, I think Jackson understands that a lot more just because of his age and some of the additional things that he hears, the conversations he's a part of. And we've talked about it from the aspect of political parties, because, he hears a lot of stuff on the news and from family members and things about this candidate or that candidate. And so, we talk a lot about it, I guess, using those examples and then some of the societal things too that make the news headlines.
Yeah, Holly's, I think, aware of it because of there being some shame circulating on some of the platforms that she's on. So she is on Twitter. She doesn't tweet. She just follows people. And so she's got some visibility to some of that in the gaming community. And then also she's on YouTube. So she has different YouTube channels that she's subscribed to. And so she can see certain creators calling out other creators for this or that. And then now she's recently joined Tumblr, where she can follow some LGBTQ folks and really kind of engage in that LGBTQ community as an ally. And they certainly are using Tumblr as a place to point out when people are not LGBTQ friendly. And so she's got some questions about that. If it's an author that she likes, if it's J.K. Rowling, right? And this author doesn't seem to hold the same political position as we do, or even the same philosophical position as we do, how do I respond to that particular author? And most of what we talk about is in that case, right? And I mentioned as we were prepping for this, our radio show right on SC took this on specifically about literature on Saturday morning. And so we spent a lot of time last week kind of chewing it over like, okay, well, if a writer does something or says something that is external from the work they've created, right, from this story they've created, is the writer their work? Are these things interchangeable? And if that's true, then if the writer is writing about a pedophile, if it's, Nabokov and he's writing Lolita, right, and he's out there talking about this, do we now think that he must be a pedophile? Like, is that how we're making these associations on the literary side? And so that's something the literature has been dealing with for a very long time. And so when J.K. Rowling comes out and she says that she doesn't agree or doesn't understand, she says something that's insensitive related to transgender people, This is a political statement from her. And the question is it worth giving up your Harry Potterness, to say, well, I renounce J.K. Rowling for not being supportive of transgender people? Or is the right position to say, well, she has a right to her own opinion? And I would think that from a libertarian perspective, it would be the latter, that we would say, her work is her work. I care about her work. I'm interested in the work. That the work itself it doesn't negatively address transgender people. It is not transgender phobic. The work itself is not, right? And so therefore, if the individual has this position, she has freedom of speech and freedom to have that position and express that position. And we can separate the two. But should we even have to get that detailed, right? Would we even have to weigh into that if this concept of cancel culture didn't exist?
Yeah, and we wouldn't. I mean, and I think I have a good example that I probably relate to a little bit more than on the literature side, because I know literature is kind of your thing. But for me, the most recent example is Ryan Adams. He's a musician, not Brian, Ryan.
Yeah.
But last February, there was an article written. I think the New York Times issued it, and it had information from a lot of women in his life that he had mistreated them and acted pretty disgustingly. But I love Ryan Adams. I've loved Ryan Adams for a long time, and it was very hard to work through that emotionally, because his music has gotten me through a lot of really tough times. But at some point I was able to say, okay, I can separate his behavior from his music, because what he did was not so egregious. Now, if he were doing things like hurting children, things like that, then obviously he'll never get another dime of my money. But in this case, making that decision of, what did he do? And is it worth throwing away all my records and all my t-shirts and all my ticket stubs? And it wasn't. So, and then the other side of that is, should somebody judge me for that? Right? Like, there's a whole fan community who's like, if you don't denounce him for what he did allegedly, then you aren't a good person. You're a terrible person. If you still have your albums, if you still have your t-shirts, then you're terrible. I mean, there are people out there who are actually saying these things, and it's like, are you freaking kidding me?
But I'm not surprised, right? Do you remember
Yeah.
back when the Dixie Chicks were persona non grata because of what they said
Yeah.
on stage in London and how they were excoriated? Do you remember the Entertainment Weekly cover that had the three of them naked with all the words that had been, the mean things that had been said about them and to them, and they were getting death threats and such because all they said was that they were embarrassed that the president was from Texas. That's it. That's all they said. Can you even imagine? And people were burning their tickets. They were refusing to go to their concerts. They were breaking their CDs. Country music radio banned them. If you haven't seen Shut Up and Sing, which is a fantastic documentary on cancel culture from that particular era, we were so, in the United States after 9/11, there was this massive swell of misdirected patriotism. And that misdirected patriotism found as its target anybody who would speak against war, against the military, against invasion of Iraq, invasion of Afghanistan, and against the president. And those mobs turned. And that was well before social media, I think, was even really a big thing. But this is not new. This concept of the mob mentality piling on, making people feel bad, shaming them, wanting them to take back what they've said. And what I love so much about the Chicks, now they're called the Chicks, right? It's not new. It's just, I think, maybe a little bit easier now to shame other people because of the rapid communication of social media. And I'm interested in how people will go and find old social media, old posts, old writings, old videos, and bring that stuff up, dredge that stuff up, and shame people with it. I'm really interested in this idea of like, there's like a lottery mentality of like, everybody gather ye rocks and start throwing them at one specific person, because it's great to be on the throwing side until you're on the side that's taking the rocks. right?
And realistically, in the age of social media, I mean, we have all posted something that 10 years ago we thought was a good idea, but now we're like, really, Jessica, why did you post that? Like, why did you say that thing? And those of us with anxiety, we lay awake thinking about that at night, but for hours. Another thing that drives me crazy about that specific example with people dredging up those things is, I mean, you take the example of a post, let's say a social media post from 10 years ago. Let's say I posted something 10 years ago. It was probably very Tea Party-esque because that was when I was still coming into my libertarianism, right? Like I was still exploring this and trying to figure out where I kind of fit into all these different bubbles and things. And I mean, there were things that I posted that if you look at now, they would probably be misconstrued in one way or another, right? I mean, there have been times probably in my teenage years when I said things that were, insensitive racially or, to someone's sexuality. I mean, those are things that now I would be crucified for, right? And I mean, the thing is, like, people are using that not as a means to say this person is at their core not a good person, that this is not somebody that I want to associate that I want to associate with. They're saying this person is inherently bad and I'm going to ruin their life.
Mhm.
Like I'm going to go to their employer, I'm going to get them fired, I'm going to go to whatever opportunity, whatever community groups, and I'm going to get them banned from those. I mean, it's this idea that you can ruin someone's life that easily with one thing, and it could be something that this person no longer in any way whatsoever agrees with or feels.
A couple of things to unpack there. On first, on the using it to ruin somebody else's life. So, real quick, you have really two options when it comes to seeing something or hearing something that you don't want to hear or that you don't want to see. You can scroll past, right? You can just keep scrolling, right? You just say that's not, that message is not meant for me, and I'm not going to engage with this at all. Or you can engage with that message and you can come at that with a, help me understand why you feel this way. Help me understand, or did you know this or did you know that, right? And try to educate that person and try to bring that person along. These are two options. What we've created are options 3 and 4. Option 3 is you can shame that person in your own private echo chamber, right? So you don't address that person directly, but you do make fun of them on your own social media. You're taking videos of them and posting them on Twitter without their knowing, right? But you're basically shaming them in your own echo chamber of, oh, look what a Karen this person is, or so on and so forth. And then option number 4 is you let them know that you've done that because you're contacting their employer and you're shaming them on channels that copy them, that show them, and that get everybody else to pile on. So these options 3 and 4 are the most inhumane, the meanest, dirtiest things I can possibly think of, because really, what are you trying to get out of those two actions, right? You're really just putting people down to make yourself feel good. You're bullying them online. It's just another form of digital bullying. And we did a whole episode on that. I don't think options 3 and 4 are options that rational people use. Right. And yet they seem to be these sort of, I guess, the most pervasive right now. And that's what cancel culture really is those two options where we're saying you don't deserve to have an opinion, or your opinion is, even if it's an old one, it's not a good opinion. And because it's not a good opinion, I'm going to shame you and I'm going to force consequences upon you, such as being fired or losing your job or having to apologize or whatever, right? So that's the first thing. And I'm going to quiet and let you talk about that. And then the other thing I want to unpack after that is the idea that we make mistakes. And we seem to be very intolerant of mistakes right now. And we don't give people a chance to grow or to try something that maybe isn't the thing, right? We're not very forgiving of people to say, hey, I've learned a different way, or I've changed in some way. We just don't have that. You are what you are is what you are is what you are forever. And that's complete and utter bullshit. That's just not true.
Yeah. I think it's important to make the distinction between cancel culture and voluntary association, because voluntary association is something that in the, in libertarian belief, not even necessarily just in the Libertarian Party, but in the belief system that is libertarianism as a whole. Voluntary association is something that we are very protective of, right? Because it's that freedom to associate with whomever you choose, right? If you live in a small community and there are 2 grocery stores, and one grocery store owner, it's come to be known that he actively participates in, let's say, the KKK, right? Then the whole community might come together and say, we as a community choose not to support this person. We choose not to go to their business. We're not going to be patrons. That's not cancel culture. That's a group of people choosing to not support a person based on these beliefs that they have, these actions that they carry out, right? These things that they're doing that are detrimental to the health of their community.
So voluntary disassociation,
Right.
voting with
But,
your feet.
right, right. And so, but being able to choose who you associate with, that's not necessarily the cancel culture. And I think there's kind of a fine line there that can tend to get misconstrued or blurred.
I agree, because I think that people have a tendency to think, well, I wouldn't support that grocer and you shouldn't support that grocer either. And now because you do support that grocer, but I don't, I'm going to disassociate myself with you. Right.
Yeah.
So now all of
Yeah.
a sudden we're being asked to renounce things, denounce things, right? I want you to denounce your association with this
Mm-hmm.
group or that group because they've said things that are not consistent with your principles or whatever. And we had a big thing about this in Libertarian Party recently as far as the Black Lives Matter movement. And we talked a little bit about Black Lives Matter in our colorblind parenting episode. But just to be clear, the Libertarian Party supports the lowercase concept that Black Lives Matter in the same sense that we support that all individuals have rights that are afforded to them by their creator and should not be infringed upon by any other human beings, right? The capital letter Black Lives Matter movement is a self-proclaimed Marxist movement. And so when we use that capital letter BLM, it's an association with that particular movement, with that nonprofit organization, right? In which case we've had some people that said, don't support them, don't be part of that. And so we, as a party, have had to have conversation around that. And so I think that's the voluntary association principle. Are we for their idea philosophically, but opposed to their platform and some of the ways, the means by which they plan to achieve that equality, their perceived equality, right? And all of that speaks to people making logical and reasonable decisions based on what they learn about one another by listening to one another and engaging in conversation, not simply pointing and
Yeah.
shaming.
But that's the easy way, right? Like, that's talking to people requires time and patience. A lot of people they're not gonna do that anymore.
Well, and the
Um,
possibility you could be changed, right? If I
yeah,
listen to what you have to say, you might change my mind. And
yeah,
maybe I don't want my mind changed. I'm perfectly happy in how I feel and what I think. And so I don't want to listen to what you have to say. That might change me. I don't feel that way. Can I just let me put that out there, Casey, as a person? I know it says somebody else's mom on my name here, but so as an individual, as a person, I want to be changed. I want people to introduce new ideas that are going to make me smarter, make me more compassionate, make me feel love more deeply, more personally. I want that. And so I have a really hard time with people who don't want to engage and don't want to be part of conversation, because I'm like, what do you mean you don't want to be changed? How can you not want to get better?
yeah.
Voluntary association includes your employment, right? And so talk a little bit about this Tom Brennaman Case, right? Where we have this hot mic and the slur being heard. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I saw it on the news, and it was actually right after we wrapped up production on the last episode. I think it was maybe the next day, and I saw it. It was this baseball. I think he's a sports announcer for.
The Cincinnati Reds.
Yeah, so he was on the mic. He said something that was very inappropriate, and he didn't realize that his mic was hot, and so in the next, I guess it was in the next inning, like, I mean, it did not take long. It did not take long. And they removed him from the air. And so he had to apologize. And then they pulled him like middle of the game. They were like, out, gone, done. Because what he had said was, I mean, obviously it was inappropriate. It was disgusting. Shouldn't have been said, right? Especially not in that setting. Not at all. But this person is a public figure, right? And so,
well, pause real quick right there, because I know we're going to talk about employer, and I want to give that piece to you, but I want to talk about being a radio personality and having a hot mic real quick. He knows better.
Yeah.
He knows better than to use derogatory language anywhere near the broadcasting booth or the mic. So from a sense of professionalism, I mean, I cuss like a fucking sailor, right? Like all that. But when my students are in front of me, that doesn't happen. When I'm on the radio on Saturday mornings, that doesn't happen. And I've only been doing this for a couple of years. So he knows better. And I think that's probably where he's being judged a little bit, maybe more harshly than other people might be, is that he simply seemed to just not care or to have. And so, okay, so now talk about the employer side of it.
Yeah. So from an employer perspective, as an employer, you have the right, in South Carolina, you have the right to fire someone for any reason. You don't have to employ someone. Obviously there are some things you can't fire people for by law, but if someone is acting in their professional capacity, like this guy was, and in some cases even outside of it, like I'm in a position of leadership for my company, which is why I'm very careful about how much I say about where I work, just because I don't want there to ever be like this blurred line between the two where what I do outside of work ever jeopardizes what I do at work, because I'm really good at my job and it shouldn't, right? But if I were to go out and present myself as an employee of my employer and I were acting in a way that is not consistent with our core beliefs of our company and the things that we operationally hold very important, my employer can fire me.
Yeah.
Right. And so, if you go out and you hear the stories of people who are at these protests acting a fool, and people see their faces and they find out who they are, their employer can fire them. And that might be bordering on cancel culture a little bit, but
well, let's think about that though too, because the flip of that, or the reverse of that, is where we see police officers that can't be fired.
Yeah.
For egregious violations or unionized jobs where people are clearly not doing their job, but they have longevity, they have seniority, they have whatever, right? And they're being protected either by unions or by seniority or whatever kind of rules exist. So it's not necessarily a spectrum as far as, yeah, I can fire you at the drop of the hat versus you can never get fired. But we've seen before where professors who have tenure, there's this sense of being insulated, right? I have seniority and I can do and say things that maybe are not consistent with the university. And the university will say, no, that's not true at all, right? And so and they'll get removed. So it's vital in a free market to have voluntary association from employer to employee, because it enables the employer to persist in their own values. And if you're somebody that doesn't possess the same values as your employer, number one, you should be working there. Right? Like that's not the place for you, right? But number two, if you're a company whose brand could be damaged by somebody's behavior, then you're going to want to have the right to remove that person. And so that I don't think as much is cancel culture. Cancel culture is more about unbased, really unbased or maybe rickety based, right? We think
Yeah.
about the Goya Beans guy, right? So the Goya Beans company, he went to a President Trump event. He sat next to the president. He was grateful for having the opportunity to do so. And all of a sudden, people said, well, if you support President Trump, then we won't buy Goya beans. Well, come on. Do we give a rat's ass about the politics of our bean company? You know what I mean? Like, do we really
No,
care who makes
no.
beans? Like, really? The Bush's baked beans guy, we're really going to be mad that they used a golden retriever because golden retrievers are inbred and part of puppy mills, and PETA's on a bandwagon and now nobody can eat Bush's baked beans? Like, is that a thing? Is that how we behave? That's how irrational this seems to me, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and if you are, so the most recent one that happened this week was so my husband's in tires, and he's been in tires for a very long time. And there's a particular brand who this past week has been associated with this cancel culture scenario. And this is not just from the left. It's not just people on the left hating on Trump supporters, right? So it's not just the anti-Goya baked beans. It's also coming from the right. And in this case, with a tire manufacturer, one of their plants had a training slide deck, and on the slide deck it was trying to teach cultural inclusivity and diversity, and it talked about things people can and cannot say, and the slide deck went too far, but it was probably taken out of context. Let's be honest, you've built slide decks before where if people just read the bullet points, they wouldn't have gotten the point of what you're trying to say, right? But
Right.
apparently the slide was taken out of context, or for whatever reason this person had gone rogue. Who knows what the real story is? But the point is, now we have people that are claiming they will never buy that tire, retailers that are not going to stock that tire or sell that tire or suggest that tire to their customers unless their customers ask for it. And so it's hurting the brand because this slide was put out on social media as evidence that the company feels that way, but the company doesn't necessarily feel that way. And for whatever reason, the company maybe was not fast enough to contradict it or whatever, but the cancel culture is in full effect. And even now, a week after this thing got going, my husband's customers are still saying they're not going to stock that company's tires. Retailers are saying they're not going to stock that company's tires. And this is what cancel culture is trying to do. It's trying to force your dollars to go in one way or the other. And it's not just from the left against the right. It's also from the right against the left. It's this mob mentality that is just completely out of control.
Well, and I want to go back because I think because this is like an onion, right? There are a lot of layers to peel back on this topic. But I want to go back to the example of the protester, right? So you have a protester who someone sees them, they recognize them, and they use the fact that they were at that protest to, make them lose their job or whatever that is. I think it's important to note that your right to protest it's a right. Like that's your right to freedom of speech. Like that's a very core fundamental right that we have. How does cancel culture affect freedom of speech,
Yeah.
right? And does it? Because it can, right? Because you think if you're afraid to go out and participate in a protest because you're worried about, someone from the far left or the far right retaliating against you in a way that they take your image and they send it to your employer and they get you fired. They send it to your church and your church bans you, which we hope wouldn't happen at a church. But I have heard of instances where it has,
Yeah. Freedom of speech can be used as an excuse to say terrible things. Right. And
Absolutely.
so if we look at some radio broadcasters that have used freedom of speech as their privilege to say false things, right? To promote false ideas, to try to lie, to libel, to slander people, right? Freedom of speech has been used in those instances. And it's a complex thing to try to figure out if somebody is exercising their freedom of speech or if they're simply hiding behind freedom of speech to say terrible things, right? At the same time, and this is what we talked about on the radio show last week, even if they're hiding behind it, they still have the right to say terrible things. And
Right.
you, as a listener, have the right to just keep scrolling, right? Like, just scroll right by, or
Yeah.
just turn it off, just change the channel, just walk away. Exercise your right as a grown person with the freedom to simply turn it off, to not engage in that conversation. And yet we're not doing that. We're just seeing more and more where people feel like, well, they have to be, we have to discipline them, or we have to shame them, or we have to correct them, or we have to correct is probably the right word. People really feel like they need to correct others right now. And I don't
Mhm.
know where that self-righteousness comes from, but I certainly don't possess that. Like I wouldn't feel
Entitlement. Entitlement.
I'm so much smarter than you. I'm so much more evolved than you. I absolutely
I
have a right
just
to correct you.
I deserve your respect. I deserve to be catered to. I deserve this,
Oh, the
or I'm
I
owed that.
deserve, the I deserve statements. Like, I feel like we need a whole
Yeah.
episode on that. This has been episode 8 of Parenting Porcupines. Next week, we're going to get back together with Melissa and with Alex, and we're going to talk, I think, more about this concept of cancel culture, and specifically about how free speech is impacted by cancel culture and what free speech actually means, because I think there may be some misconceptions there. This has been Parenting Porcupines. I'm Casey. Say goodbye, Jessica.
Bye, everybody.
We'll see you next week for episode 9. Take care.